Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, the region's longest-running public affairs program. Legislative Report is a weekly review of activity at the state capitol featuring lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota. Most importantly, it's an opportunity for viewers to call or email their legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, WDSE News and Public Affairs producer Greg Grell. Well, it's a busy time of the year for the Minnesota Legislature as important bills take shape before heading into the final weeks of this session. This is your opportunity today to call with questions for the lawmakers that represent you. We've got two phone numbers that you can use. Locally, dial 218-788-2844. And if you're calling out from outside the Duluth area, we have a toll-free number, which is 1-877-307-8762. When you call, a volunteer will write down your question and we'll get to as many of those questions as time allows for today. You can also email your questions to askmlr@wdsc.org. Right now it's time to introduce the legislators who are joining us in the studio. And sitting on my left, Representative Mary Murphy, a Democrat from Hermantown. Welcome back.
You're welcome too.
Representative Mike Sundin, a Democrat from Esko, is here.
Great to be here.
And Representative Jennifer Schultz, a Democrat from Duluth. Thanks for being here. And mentioned in the intro that it's a busy time of the year. A lot of the omnibus bills, which are the bills that really have a lot of different things in them, finance for all the different departments, policy items, are all kind of heading down the pipeline right now. Representative Murphy, that means there's a lot happening in the next few weeks at the legislature.
That's correct, and that's where the public really hears what's in the bills or what made it and what didn't make it. If they were following something, they should listen to the committee review of the bill before it leaves committee and goes to Ways and Means or to taxes.
And Representative Sundin, we were talking a little bit before the show, there really are a lot of ways of keeping up now with the legislature. I mean, here on public television, we air the legislature on our Minnesota channel, live sessions, committee hearings, but there's also the Senate and House media services, which provide a lot of information. Many ways for folks to keep up with what's happening.
Absolutely. You can Google the Minnesota State Legislature and you can actually follow current committee work or floor action in the Senate or in the House at any given time when we're in session. So it's almost impossible to not keep up.
And we do know, Representative Schultz, an upcoming schedule, and one of the things we want to talk about is the Omnibus Health and Human Services Bill, easy for me to say. And there's a lot of, lots in that, and there are some potential reforms in there. Talk a little bit about that bill.
So when the targets came out, they had cuts of $1.1 billion in cuts from the HHS budget. So we knew there were going to be some big changes, and one of them is to eliminate Minnesota Care and push those individuals on to MNsure, which is the health insurance exchange. And they were hoping to save millions of dollars so they can help increase reimbursements to nursing homes. So they've changed how nursing homes are reimbursed in Minnesota, and that should help nursing homes in greater Minnesota. The other thing that they are suggesting is in their bill is a 5% increase for caregiving in the home, and that's a one-year increase. So that's not. I don't know if that will be sustained, but that's what they have in their budget. So people are really concerned about the elimination of Minnesota Care, which is close to 100,000 people covered, low-income adults, and that program has been around for 20 years. And there's a lot of advocates at the Capitol wanting to save Minnesota Care. They had a rally there last week. So I think even the Minnesota Hospital Association is coming out advocating against repealing Minnesota Care.
Now, since the House Republicans are in charge in the House because they have the majority, I imagine many details of the bill haven't been out to the Democrats yet. Are you expecting to see more and learn more when you have the hearings this week?
Right, so they were heard, parts of the bill, they were heard last week, but the funding part, there were a few mistakes in their spreadsheets. So they had to go back and fix some of those mistakes and take more testimony on the financing side. So that will be done next week, and then it will go on to Ways and Means. So I'm not sure when that bill will come to the floor.
Now, you mentioned the big cuts that the Republicans are calling for, and they are calling for some administrative savings in their bills. Is there enough of that to make that up, or is there going to have to be compromise somewhere?
I think they're probably going to be cost shifting on to consumers. If they do eliminate Minnesota Care, which I don't think will happen because I don't think the Senate will support that and I don't think the governor will support that. But they're in there, the way they've budgeted it, the cost savings is they're shifting costs on to enrollees in those programs. So they'll have to pay more out of pocket rather than the state subsidizing those programs for low-income adults.
All right, we'll talk some more probably about health care, and if folks have questions, please call them in during our afternoon here on Minnesota Legislative Report. Representative Sundin, another omnibus bill that's coming down the pike is the Ag Finance Bill, Omnibus Finance Bill. Talk a little bit about that bill, what's in it, what people in our region might be interested in.
The Ag Finance Bill is probably the smallest of the omnibus bills that come out. The budget's fairly low, and I find that somewhat remarkable given the impact that agriculture has on the whole state. But I did get a piece in on one bill that will be included there, and that's expands the loan guarantees for farmers throughout the state. It's the Rural Finance Authority. The participation limit was increased. You know, the cost of farming equipment, purchasing land, starting up a new farm, that's increased over the years, and those loan limits have not risen. I believe it was in 9 years. So we updated that a little bit, and that can have an impact on any farm, large or small. And I guess in Carleton County in particular, you'd look to the emerging organic farms that are coming up in the county, and I hope some of those can utilize that financial mechanism to make their businesses, prosper a little bit more.
And I was just going to bring up that you don't think of northeastern Minnesota really as a farming area, but there is some growth in some pockets in northeastern Minnesota, and you mentioned some in Carleton County.
Sure. Yeah. And there's plenty of cattle, in Carleton County, Aiken County, surrounding areas. And another issue that was addressed right away in the legislature was the monetary relief for farmers that were losing cattle to wolves. So there's plenty of issues that come about that are affected through that committee.
All right, and
I'm
Representative
serving on
Schultz.
egg policy, so a couple things that came up. We had a hearing last week on the avian flu virus that's affecting our turkey producers.
Right.
So they've lost about over 1 million turkeys, and it's a problem. And so we had people come from the University of Minnesota CFAN school, and they were talking about the epidemiologists at the University of Minnesota wanting to find out what's causing it and how it's transmitted and ways to prevent it. So they delayed the finance omnibus bill so they could put in a budget to directly help producers and to fund, hopefully, the University of Minnesota to continue their research.
All right, well, and if anybody has any ag questions, we've got somebody here that can answer them. Two people. Representative Sundin?
Yeah, we did provide relief. Representative Bly made a motion to suspend rules the other night, and we provided some relief for stemming that turkey virus. There's a total of, I believe it was 26 farms affected so far, with upwards of 1 million turkeys gone.
That's a big number. That's obviously a big impact for those farms.
Yeah, and Minnesota is the #1 turkey producing state in the nation. So it's a big deal.
And Representative Murphy, another omnibus bill you mentioned coming up, the jobs bill, the so-called jobs bill. Can you talk about that a little bit? Is there some good news in the jobs bill so far?
Well, it passed out of committee. It passed out of Ways and Means on Friday afternoon. The Cirrus, there's $2 million in it for Cirrus, jobs and development at Cirrus Industries. And there's some greater Minnesota workforce issues that are contained in it, but not nearly enough. And there's, like most omnibus bills that are passing, seem to have one onerous bill that's already passed the House of Representatives back in the omnibus bill. So if you didn't like the onerous bill in the first place, you don't like it in the second place either. And so that creates another problem. And in this one, it was the tip penalty bill, the bill that said that if tipped employees don't have to get as much minimum wage as everybody else. And so that was back in this jobs bill too. And so it was passed totally by the Republicans.
All right, well, we are starting to get some questions now from viewers, so I'll start with William from Hermantown. And William's wondering, Representative Sundin, is the Northern Lights Express train still in the legislative agenda? And if so, why do you think it will succeed when Amtrak couldn't succeed in the 70s?
I think I answered this last time I was on the show. But as far as transit and rail transit, there's absolutely very little, if anything. I think we had passed some research money in the last session, but there's nothing in the budget, the transportation bill for Northern Lights Express, or very little for rail in general whatsoever.
But Northern Lights Express is still something that is still a possibility.
It's still a possibility because of the developmental money that was put in previous years. And we're right on track with the development and the study and the expectations of where it should be.
And Representative Sundin, as a Duluth representative, perhaps you, or I should say Representative Schultz, as a Duluth representative, perhaps you'd have an opinion on Northern Lights. We haven't heard your point of view.
I'm a strong advocate of public transportation, and when I'm down in St. Paul, I take the light rail green line to the Capitol every day. And unfortunately, there's no money really in the transportation bill for public transportation by rail. And those representatives from Rochester want the zip rail. So I've been working with them on both sides, advocating for their zip rail, and hopefully they'll be advocating for our Northern Lights Express. But we're really waiting to see what's going to happen at the federal level to get more money.
And to answer William's question, why do you think it would be more successful now than Amtrak was back in the 70s and 80s?
I think I can answer that in part anyway. When the transit puzzle is complete in the metro area, it will make a ton of sense to have that Northern Lights Express in. Because then you can get on the train in Duluth, go down to the metro area, and for a couple bucks you can travel around the metro area, get back on that train and get back the same day. When that transit piece is more complete down in the metro area, it's going to make a ton of sense to have this train in place. So we should keep on working on it. If we have to acquire land, if we have to do more research, more engineering, let's keep that thing on track, Mary.
But as fossil fuel goes up in price, oil goes up, people are going to be, I think, more likely to take public transportation than they did in the 70s. So, and Duluth, we have so many students traveling from the cities every weekend or every month that go to school at St. Scholastica or Lake Superior College or the University of Minnesota Duluth. So I just see a big demand for it. And, we might, as a state, have to subsidize it, but we subsidize roads and bridges, so it's the same.
And Representative Sundin?
If gas were up to $5 or $6 a gallon, it would make a ton of sense to have that train in place.
It is making it a little bit easier for your trips south of the legislature this session, with gas prices quite a bit cheaper.
That's true. That's true. If you pick the right spot to get your gas. But another thing that's increasing in the cities is the cost of parking. Parking is very, very rarely can you park for more than an hour for less than $7. And so that makes a difference. But to answer his question too about Amtrak in the 70s and 80s, the federal government at that time didn't keep up their promise on paying the subsidy to the state that they were supposed to. And there weren't as many people traveling back and forth in those days as there are now.
And I remember it being more of almost like a weekend head to the recreation train, not a daily business commuter type train back then.
Exactly. And like Friday night, I left the Capitol, or the state office building, at about 10 after 6. And there was double lane traffic, all the way past Hinckley.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Friday night, people were heading north.
Could take some pressure off if it were to happen. Well, we'll have to stay tuned and see. It's a funding issue, obviously, and a political issue as well. Representative Sundin, this week there was a news story about a Carleton Care facility, the Liberalis facility, potentially closing, and I know you were quoted in that. Talk a little bit about Liberalis, what that's all about. It's not necessarily a legislative issue, or is it?
Well, it's a state finance issue is what it is, and we're talking about the governor's and the department's priorities as far as keeping that care facility open. And the Liberalis program actually serves a very, very unique subset of chemically dependent women. And I'll say that because it can cater to women that are in their third trimester of pregnancy because of its proximity to the regional hospitals here in Duluth. They're just minutes away. So that said, and they do serve a good number of Native American women. I believe there's probably a handful in there right now. That was reported to me last week. But I guess more so than that, you could take a look at the population of the patients that go through there, and those women, 95% of them have been abused, one form or another, physical abuse, mental abuse, whatever. And this facility is staffed totally by women, and their success rate is far above any other facility of its kind. And they're transforming some of those care duties to private facilities. And a remarkable part about the Liberalis facility is they have a number of their patients that have already been referred there from private facilities because of their success ratio. And we've had several meetings with staff, with the Deputy Commissioner and Barry, and trying to make our case as best we can to keep that place open. It does a great service for probably 20 women at any given time.
Are the cuts due to just budget issues from the state, or are there other overriding issues?
It's all about money. Mm-hmm. It's all about the money. No one has challenged the success ratio. And when I met with the employees there, the first words out of their mouths were, they're not worried about their job, they're worried about people not getting the care that they need. So we have dedicated employees that just want to do their job. This also has a domino effect in the community. There's 17 vendors that serve that facility in one form or another, food, services, fuel, whatever. And that's going to have a ripple effect through the community if it were to close. It was scheduled to close April 1st, and Senator Tony Laurie jumped on it right away and got an extension till July 1st. So we're looking beyond that to see if we can keep that facility open.
All right. Well, Representative Schultz, we have a call from Carol in Duluth, and you mentioned this earlier when we talked about the Omnibus Health and Human Services bill, but she's wondering, will there be an increase in reimbursement for workers at long-term care homes?
Yes, this was there were many bills on increasing employees at nursing homes and home care facilities. So I'm not sure if that's in the final omnibus bill, but we did hear that bill and it did make it out of committee.
Okay, so as of right now, if things go through and are passed and signed by the governor, then there would be increase.
Possibly. Everything's going to get worked out with these omnibus bills in conference committee. So we could have heard a bill and passed a bill out of committee. It didn't make it into the omnibus bill, but it could make it into the final legislation if we have the support of the Senate and the governor.
So for folks that are interested about specific issues like that, they really do have to pay attention because a lot of things can change and things that are out can be back in and so on, right up to the last minute.
Right. I mean, but we passed hundreds of bills out of committee, and there's no way, I think it was over, $8 billion over the budget surplus. There's just no way that on the House side, all of those things are going to get funded, unfortunately.
All right, issue that came up this week, and there was a hearing this week, and I was hoping Representative Simonson would have been here today to talk about it, but it has to do with local government aid, and Representative Murphy, perhaps you want to talk about it, but some cities like Duluth could be in for some huge local government aid cuts based on Republican budget. They're trying to equalize the amount of money per resident, I believe, an issue that could really impact Duluth and the surrounding area.
Yes, they did. They went after the monies that Duluth, St. Paul, and Minneapolis get, especially for diversity, integration kind of monies. And they said that everyone used the word equity or fairness. It was just that those were pockets of money that they were able to attack. They didn't go after Rochester, however, or Bloomington.
And Representative Schultz, as obviously a lawmaker from Duluth, this obviously has to be a concern for you.
This was a big concern for Duluth. It's a 70% cut in our LGA. And unlike Minneapolis and St. Paul, they are looking at a 50% cut. So for us, it's a lot. It's $20 million. So last year we got last session we got like 29. So we're going to get maybe 9 million, losing 20 million. It's a huge, huge loss for Duluth. So this is really unfortunate that they targeted these 3 cities, because my view is that we need our urban areas to thrive for all Minnesota to thrive. And to punish these cities just doesn't make sense. There are many, many, many cities, over 450 cities that get more per capita than Minneapolis. There's about 113 more cities, localities that get more per capita than Duluth. So the way that this came about was Representative Quam introduced a bill, and it came out in the paper. Representative Davids from the chairing the tax committee said that on average that these cities get a lot more, but there's different averages you can calculate. And so what they did, they took an total average. They put all of the LGA into a pool, divided by the total population, excluding those 3 cities, Duluth, Minneapolis, and St. Paul, and had an average. What you really want to do is take the average of the LGA in all localities. So it's the difference between taking the average of the expected value or getting the expected value and then taking the average. So I think they're not making the comparisons correctly. And there's the formula for LGA was just there was a task force. They looked at the formula. It's really complex. They take into consideration things like the age of housing, property tax revenue, and so they're kind of just throwing that formula out the window and thinking that it should be equal per capita across all of these localities. So it's going to be, I think that's going to be a big fight and big debate, and I'm going to fight so we don't take that 70% cut.
And isn't that really what local government aid is? It's trying to equalize for some of those communities that don't have the tax base but still have a large population to serve.
That's a good point. And like Jennifer Schultz just mentioned, there's a number of different components that go into it. The cities of Ely or Floodwood, they get twice as much per capita, but their per capita is that much lower. So when you start bantering these numbers around, take a look at the final number of what they receive and what they need. So that was pointed out quite well.
But they shouldn't. Jennifer referred to the per capita part, but it's not totally per capita. It's the wealth of the per capita too that is averaged in there. And they didn't look at the whole formula. They just took parts of it. And so it's not fair. It never was fair. It's something that I've ranted about for years, is that if they were going to do something with local government aid, they should make it fair on with all categories of things that they're putting in it. But it's very easy not to do that.
Would you like me to read the 449?
No, we did that. We did that Thursday night.
You came with the paperwork, you're ready to go.
Representative from Minneapolis started reading the cities that were getting a higher per capita than Minneapolis was in trying to make the point. But the point that I made 2 weeks ago too should enter in here. They're making this huge cut on local government aid when the tax committee has $2 billion to spend for taxes or for tax relief or for changing formulas. And they're not doing that. They're not doing that. And so they're making the decisions. That, like I said, the tax committee had this $2 billion to spend, whether it's on local government aid or whether it's on personal incomes or agriculture rebate or whatever, education, jobs, many, many things the tax committee could be addressing. But with even with the $2 billion that they have to spend, they're going after local government aids of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth.
Representative Schultz, you had
Those
something?
happen to be the more progressive urban areas. And you know, they didn't do the work of convening another task force to really look at that formula. They thought it was not fair. They just decided to cut local government aid to those 3 urban areas. And for Duluth, our local government aid per capita is around $340. For Minneapolis, it's around $194. So it's a like I said, it's a complicated formula. And they really, if they were really serious about making it more fair, they would have convened a task force, put experts on there, and made it more transparent so there was public testimony. But the tax committee, you know, went to midnight one night debating just this issue. They've spent probably over 10 hours just talking about this potential cut.
All right. Well, it sounds like we're going to hear more about that before this session is over, and we'll have to see what happens there. One issue that got quite a bit of attention, maybe surprisingly to some folks, were the number of gun-related bills that were voted on this week on the House floor. And I'm going to talk about some of them. One that maybe jumps out is the so-called silencers, a bill that allows silencers on guns. Representative Sundin, maybe you want to address that. What was that bill about, and what do you think of that measure?
The silencers or suppressors, as they characterized it, was just a simple device that goes on the end of a gun, firearm of any sort, rifle or pistol, to reduce the sound. One disappointment in the whole debate would have been we never got to hear, any audible
to get
evidence, to get a good fix on what these things do. But I voted in favor of all of those bills. I voted in favor of all the amendments that would have made them better bills. But they were going to be passed no matter what. I think the permitting process was interesting to learn about the permitting process, because it takes just as longer, if not longer, to get a permit for one of these suppressors than it does for the handgun itself.
So you won't be able to just go out and get one. It'll be a permit process,
absolutely
just
not.
Like buying
absolutely
the gun.
Not.
And it'll be harder to resell it too. So there's
so-
another background check. Like Representative Sundin said, it's harder and it's more rigorous to go through the process to get the suppressor or silencer, the regular gun.
And Representative Murphy?
Well, there's 3 background checks that they have to get, and 2 of them are federal. I believe it's 2. And then the local background check that they have to get originally to carry a gun, if it's not a rifle. But it's for safety. The main reason is for safety, because so many people that on a regular basis for target shooting or contests kind of things, Jack Mead gun range in my district, the neighbors that are not directly adjoining, but even from far away, said that if noise could be reduced in that area, they would be very, very happy. And so then the people that went to that regularly go to shooting practice and things like that say that they have witnessed damage in their hearing because they did not have enough suppression of the noise. And so hopefully this will do away with that.
Yeah, those suppressors actually reduce approximately 30% of the noise coming out of the firearm.
So it's not as nefarious as it might seem. Having a silencer on your gun is not to be shooting it so that people don't know you're shooting it.
They can still hear it.
I actually have one of those devices on a firearm in another state, where I leave it out in Colorado, and it does reduce the sound quite a little bit, but you still know it's a gun going off.
Mm-hmm. All right, another measure had to do with allowing folks who are already permitted to purchase guns in Minnesota then go ahead and purchase them in other states. That seems pretty much like a no-brainer.
I think those are the long guns, though,
Yeah.
not handguns.
I was
the
wondering
long
why
rifle
that
guns.
measure even needed to be passed. Wouldn't other states be the ones that worry about if you purchase it from out of the state?
It's just a matter of convenience for buying and selling long guns.
One, though, that might have had some concern for some of you is the measure that allows people who have a carry permit to carry a gun at the state capitol. That was a little bit more controversial, Representative Schultz.
That is controversial. I sometimes don't feel safe there because of this permitting. They have to notify Sergeant of Arms that they're going to be carrying a gun possibly on a certain day, and there was an amendment so that they wouldn't be able to carry guns when there are school children at the Capitol. And I believe that did not pass, but I'm concerned. Maybe I'll invest in a bulletproof vest and wear that at the Capitol, but I mean, they claim that it would make us safer if all of these folks were carrying guns. I just have problems with gun safety issues, and they're just prone to accidents when there are a lot more guns around.
Representative Sundin?
I'm more afraid of the tax committee than I am of somebody with a firearm in the Capitol.
All right, well, you are watching Minnesota Legislative Report. There's still time to get your questions here to the studio for our legislators who are representing you in St. Paul. And my final question on guns is, why all the attention on guns right now, Representative Sundin? Is it because the Republicans now in control of the House, more known for their backing of gun laws, and that's the reason?
That's part of it. You know, some of these bills that come out in amendments, some of it's political gamesmanship. They're trying to trap you into a bad vote or what they think might be a damaging vote if you were to vote against that or for that, and one of the gun groups would come after you with political lit pieces, and I don't play that game. If I believe it's right, it's right. If I believe it's wrong, that's okay too. But I don't cater to any the whims of any particular organization.
All right, well, we'll move on now to other questions. Karen from Cloquet has a question. Representative Schultz, she's wondering, why does the state continue to open up more methadone clinics? I guess I didn't know the state was opening up more methadone clinics. The one in Duluth has gotten a lot of attention because of some problems they've had.
And I think that one is actually closing. So, you know, this is based on evidence from the healthcare field that these clinics help people who are addicted and, you know, help them achieve rehabilitation and treatment. And it's one thing that's effective. There's going to be problems with those clinics. There might need to be more regulation. But heroin addiction is going up, and so they're trying to address people moving from prescription drugs because they're harder to get, and they're moving towards cheaper heroin. And so I think this is probably why there's a demand for more methadone clinics.
All right, anybody else like to comment on that? Representative Sundin, is that an issue in your district? Or?
Well, a couple of years ago, we lost a couple of county employees in Carleton County. And, they were involved in a nasty traffic accident and caused by someone that was, I guess, under the influence of methadone and traveling back and forth to Brainerd. It's a very, very messy issue. You know, the methadone, I've heard success stories, but very, very few of them. I think treating addiction as a disease rather than a criminal activity is probably the answer to the question, but it's a long way before we achieve that. It's I really don't know the answer, but what we've done so far has not been very successful.
Well, part of it is because of the expense of inpatient treatment, and usually an individual will need to have more than one treatment cycle in an inpatient care. So part of it, they're trying to save money by doing this outpatient methadone treatment, and what we probably really need to do is have more inpatient coverage so people can do a 18 or 28-day program and get rehabilitated.
I know there's some individuals that are making a lot of money transporting those patients around from clinic to homes or whatever, and they're capitalizing on the addiction problem that exists.
All right. Representative Murphy, we've had a couple of questions coming in about taxes, and we don't have somebody sitting on the tax committee, but I know that you have committees that deal with a lot of tax issues. One is, will property tax relief for low-income people continue in the future? Gary from Cloquet is wondering. Property tax relief for low-income people. And that's more of a local issue than a state legislative issue.
Well, the state legislature buys off the homestead credit. The state legislature sometimes has if you're paying more on your home than a certain amount and your income is less, you get a little rebate back in September or October. And so that's yet to be determined or yet to be revealed to us of how those two programs especially
And that would be
come
for
out in
upcoming
the tax.
years for-
Yes, it's in for
Because
2000.
I'm getting my tax rebate for 2014. I just put in for it. So.
Yes, and there's money for that. But whether we put it in for the next year or not, that's to be determined by the tax committee and the tax bill that's going to be revealed in this next week to come.
Okay.
And I just don't know if that's in there or not.
Okay.
But they are reducing property taxes, or proposing to reduce property taxes for farmers, for farmland. And
For
not-
big
For big farms, right. So this is, sometimes you could call, could be called the corporate tax reduction. And that's going to likely hurt our school districts.
Representative Sundin?
One of the failings of the property tax refund program is a lot of people don't apply for it that are in fact eligible. So I would encourage anybody to go to their library or go to their tax preparer or to the county auditor's office and fill out the form.
And the deadline for that is in April 15th. Do you have a later time to do that? Is that true?
August 15th?
August 15th?
Don't quote me on that number. Or on that,
I know
on
they
that
don't
date.
pay it back until later in the year. So, all right, Representative Schultz, been some news this week nationally about how Congress is handling the Affordable Care Act and the fact that there seems to be more national support now for the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as some people call it. What are the efforts going on at the state legislature? It seems like Minnesota's, even the Republicans in Congress are starting to back off from trying to tear apart the Affordable Care Act, but not so much in Minnesota?
Well, Representative Mack has a bill. She chairs the Health and Human Services Reform Committee. And in that piece of legislation, she would allow individuals to go off the MNsure exchange, which is created under the Affordable Care Act, and get a subsidy to buy it on the private market off the exchange. To do that, you need a federal waiver. And so you have to show, to get the federal waiver to do innovations with your health insurance exchange, you have to show that there's going to be cost savings and a greater benefit to the current system. And in her bill, there's nothing that does that. So we have a bill, many of the DFL representatives, that will look at different proposals to innovate MNsure, make it cheaper and more affordable, cover more people, and increase the benefits. So I've been working with the director of MNsure, Scott Lights, coming up with some ideas to make it more sustainable, and so we can run it efficiently and at a very, very low cost.
So some more reform to come, and we'll have to stay tuned to see what comes of that. Representative Sundin, this week Governor Dayton unveiled a proposal to add $2 million to the DNR's annual forestry budget. and they want to have better forest management with that. I don't know if that's an issue that you'll be dealing with directly, but what are your thoughts on that? Is that a good idea to add some money to the forestry budget?
Yeah, it's a good idea. I believe in trees. But I actually signed on to House File 2219, shade tree grant funding provided that addresses the emerald ash borer issue. Thanks for bringing that up, and I've got a good segue into that topic. Anyway,
and that's encroaching on Minnesota right now. Have we found a lot of emerald ash borer in Minnesota yet? I know it's a problem in Wisconsin.
It's heading this way. It will be here. You know, it's right across the pond here, and down in the metro area. It's coming across the St. Croix River over there. So it's definitely going to be a problem statewide. And 17% of the trees in Minnesota happen to be ash trees. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about quite a resource that could be affected here. So there's lots of lumber uses and a lot of firewood uses, and how we deal with that is going to be very important going forward.
Well, for example, just across the border here in Superior, they actually took out all their ash trees, mm-hmm. even in a preemptive manner, because they had many along their boulevards. So will this bill help replace trees, or what will the bill do?
I'll go to alternative trees. You know, cut the ash trees down. But when I say 17% of the forest in Minnesota, you're looking at a lot of dead trees statewide. So it's a very important issue.
All right, and speaking of Minnesota and Wisconsin, Representative Schultz, it appears there's some progress being made on reinstating tax reciprocity with Wisconsin. This is more of an administrative thing right now, but being a representative in a border community, this tax reciprocity is a big issue for folks in our community.
Yeah, for those who work in one state and live in another, so I think that will help our constituents. It also, you know, we have this very similar thing for spending in higher education. Unfortunately, because of state funding decreases in Minnesota, our tuition is usually much higher than tuition in Wisconsin. So a lot of our students go to Wisconsin because it's cheaper.
Sure. Representative Murphy, one thing we haven't talked too much about on today's show is education, and you're on the Education Finance Committee. Talk a little bit about education, what's happening right now. There's an omnibus bill coming, I would assume, on education finance.
The omnibus K early childhood through 12th grade finance bill passed out of committee on Thursday and went to Ways and Means. It's a bill that does not recognize, in my opinion, does not recognize education as our #1 priority. It does not meet the expectations of the people that wanted education to be #1 priority. The people that came before the committee from January, February, March, and testified on the needs of what their school districts needed or what their individual schools were accomplishing, it does not meet their desire to have a raise in per pupil unit formula. Most of them agreed or said that $300 per child on the formula would keep them moving forward from where the last administration, the last 2 years brought them up to, and $300 per student would move them forward in addressing the needs of their growing districts. Most of those were for growing districts or districts that wanted to stay where they were. We didn't meet the $300, we met $33 per student across the state. $33 in this next year, in 2016 year, and $34 in 2017.
Additional per pupil.
Yes, additional per pupil. And so the majority passed it.
Representative Schultz, with your being an educator yourself at the higher level, what do you think of the priorities the state has right now for education at any level, I guess?
Well, so for one of the GOP's first education bills was to look at performance of teachers and to really tie payments to performance, which you see happening across the country. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that we are not funding education adequately based on the bills that are passing out of the House. I even know that there's school districts getting prepared to put levies to vote on more money being raised locally to fund their school district because the state's not funding it. So I agree with the governor's budget on education all the way from early ed, Head Start. You know, we have a great program in Duluth that's over 50 years old, and it's very integrated into our public schools. I would like to see more money going to Head Start. I like the pre-K funding that's in the governor's budget, and very disappointed in the GOP House's proposal for higher ed. Basically, they're not giving any additional money to the University of Minnesota, and that's going to be a problem for the University of Minnesota Duluth because we already have high tuition, and if we raise tuition anymore, it's going to significantly impact our enrollment. And if we lose enrollment, for every 100 students we lose, it's $1 million in revenue. And we're already facing a $6 million deficit, recurring deficit that we need to address. And the Chancellor Black rolled out some budget cutting, which is going to be across the board in every unit, and that's going to hurt us even more. We're cutting things like the honors program, international study abroad programs, library services, research services for faculty. So these are things that we really don't want to cut, but we're forced to cut because we're already so lean. So I would like to see a lot more money going in all the way from Head Start all the way up to higher ed for funding.
And Representative Sundin, you serve on some committees that deal with jobs and growing jobs in the state, and we always talk about education being such an important part of that, so I imagine this would be a concern of yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to the pre-K proposals by the governor, that really does prove his commitment to the learning process for the entire state. There is one little flaw in that that I've had discussions with superintendents with the all-day kindergarten that we've implemented statewide. All of a sudden, if we were to bring in more students, they simply wouldn't have the room in some of these school districts. So they'd have to take a hard look at how they're going to accommodate those numbers, which, you know, it's a good problem to have if you're doing the good work. So that's one thing. I don't know if they brought that up in committee much at all, but
They've talked
okay.
about that. They've talked about that, but if there was a phase-in program for the 4-year-olds,
yeah,
then they could, they wouldn't have to have all 4-year-olds going to public schools. Some could be still remaining in home care facilities too. And if there was a phase-in.
okay.
And so that wouldn't hit those schools so bad all at once.
Representative Sundin, another issue that has been getting a fair amount of attention, and there was some movement this week. Republican leaders in the House did put some funding for broadband infrastructure back into the bill, but it's $8 million, quite a bit less than what the governor called for. And a lot of people didn't think the governor was asking for enough. What's your feeling on broadband investment and the importance to rural Minnesota?
It is so very important to get this done. I compare it to the rural electrification of 80, 90 years ago. This is 70 to 90 years ago. It's so important to bring the industries and the businesses in outstate greater Minnesota into the fold, and everyone can participate in this great thing. And to see where the Republicans have proposed so little for it is very telling on their commitment to what they promised. When a lot of these legislators were running, they fully supported every economic issue for rural Minnesota. better roads and better schools and for rural Minnesota. And we haven't seen that, and I think the broadband issue is very, very telling on that point.
Representative Schultz, being from a more urban area, that broadband is still important with the medical centers in Duluth, education centers. There's a lot of distance learning, distance medicine that can happen with good high-speed internet connections.
Right, we just passed a telemedicine bill, so reimbursing healthcare systems for the telemedicine they provide, but you need that infrastructure and broadband in rural areas to make that function. So it's hurting more women too, because not having broadband really changes their lives. You know, they could be maybe starting their own business online, or finishing degrees or starting degrees, and getting educated while if they have children, taking care of their children. So it's like electrification, but also like, you know, getting refrigeration. So it's really can be life-changing and contribute to economic development in rural Minnesota. And it is extremely disappointing that what they campaigned on, they're not making good on those promises, and they're really hurting greater Minnesota.
Well, speaking of electronic communication, we've got a question from Charles via email, so it doesn't necessarily need to be broadband, but got here by email. And the question is about the Lester Park Golf Course, and Representative Schultz, I believe that's in your district. The question is, any news about the liquor license for Lester Park Golf Course? Now, that's a city issue, but there's also a state law about where liquor stores or liquor sales can be located in eastern Duluth.
Right.
Is there a movement on that at the legislature?
There is. So we introduced a bill to allow the city council to have the ability to vote on that. And that was pushed as a city priority. And we took our time to make sure that there was buy-in in Lakeside for that to happen before we move forward. And I received almost all positive responses from constituents in that side, in Lakeside. So they do now have the ability to vote on it, the city council, and it's only for that part of that golf course. So it's not broad at all. It's very, very narrow. That liquor license stays with the city if the city council passes it, and it can't be resold.
And that's and not an off-sale license, it's just for having a drink in the clubhouse, basically?
That's right, it's just on site.
So there wouldn't be a liquor store attached or
No,
anything like that?
no.
I supported that measure in Commerce Committee, and I'm a lousy golfer, but I'm pretty good.
It's not going to make you any better, Mike.
I'm a pretty good beer
Well, I
drinker.
think they can have 3-2 beer there sold already. This
Right.
is just for regular beer and other
Right.
liquor.
And speaking of that now, the Senate voted this week on their liquor bill, and of course the part that got the attention was no Sunday liquor sales in Minnesota, which has been an ongoing issue. The vote was a little closer than it has been in the past, but the House already had passed a omnibus liquor bill. Is that true or not, Representative Murphy?
Not to my knowledge.
No.
I
Okay.
haven't voted on a
It's
liquor
not
bill.
in their
not yet.
omnibus bill, Sunday liquor sales, because they don't think it will pass. But Speaker Dowd said it may still come to the floor. We may vote on it. I don't think there's enough votes to pass yet. I think they need to get all the stakeholders in the room and figure out what the problems are, because I know a lot of people want it.
It's moving, it's starting to ebb a little bit,
Yes.
and it is a bipartisan issue. There's been votes on either side of the aisle for and against.
Yeah, a lot of people do want it, but I have yet to hear from a liquor store owner in my district that wants it. You know, there's labor costs and extra added business expenses for that extra day open. They'd have to be open, and then for no real increase in sales. So
Yeah.
from a business standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense for so many liquor stores.
And in Duluth, we don't have many big box liquor stores. They're all locally owned, and those individuals do not want to be open on Sunday.
And now there was a provision for what they call growler sales on Sunday. Has that passed, or is that in the bill, Representative Schultz?
I believe it is, and I believe that will pass.
And that would allow businesses like bars and restaurants to fill up basically a jug of beer that you can take home with you on a Sunday. So, all right. Well, that is going to be it for today's show. I want to thank Representative Murphy, Representative Sundin, Representative Schultz for being here. I'm afraid we have run out of time this week on Minnesota Legislative Report. Again, thanks to all the lawmakers who make this program possible. Thanks to everyone who called or emailed their questions today. Please join us again next week on Sunday, April 26th for another edition of Legislative Report. For the crew here at WDSE, I'm Greg Grell. Have a great evening.